Welcome to today's episode of True to Form with your host, President and co-founder of Crystal Clear, highly regarded speaker, and two-time Inc. 500 entrepreneur, Tim Sawyer. True to Form is a podcast that highlights leaders making headway in the aesthetic, anti-aging, and elective medical industry. Learn from the experts to discover the secrets of success and pitfalls to avoid when growing all aspects of your elective medical practice. This week's episode is brought to you by Candela, a leading US-based global medical aesthetic device company, engineering technology that enables practices to provide advanced solutions for a broad range of medical aesthetic applications, including hair removal, wrinkle reduction, tattoo removal, women's health treatments, facial resurfacing, traumatic and surgical scar treatments, body contouring, improving the skin's appearance through the treatment of benign vascular and pigmented lesions, and the treatment of acne, leg veins, and cellulite. Please join me in welcoming your host, the authentic, the transparent, Tim Sawyer.
Hello and welcome to True to Form, the podcast that connects you to the people, technology, and hot topics that shape the elective medical community. Provided to you by Crystal Clear and brought to you by this week's sponsor, Candela, the leading US-based medical aesthetic device company. I'm your host, Tim Sawyer. To our returning guests, welcome back. And for our first-time listeners, we appreciate you joining us and encourage you to become a subscriber. The last episode, we spoke with owner of Idaho's #1 med spa, Spa 35, had a great conversation with Warren Danforth, where he shared tips for scaling his business during a crisis and how deeper connections can be made between patients and practice. If you missed it, you have to check it out. So with that said, we have a special guest, one of the few returning guests that we've had. This was one of the most popular episodes that we recorded a year ago, and we're grateful for him to be back with us. He is at the epicenter of some of the issues that we're dealing with in elective medicine right now. My guest is Brad Adatto, who is a partner of the Adatto law firm. He's a leading healthcare law firm. They are a leading healthcare law firm, and they work with physicians, physician groups, and other medical service providers in developing ambulatory surgical centers, in-office and freestanding ancillary service facilities, medical joint ventures. These guys are the bomb. He regularly counsels clients with respect to federal and state healthcare regulations and the impact that has on their investments, transactions, and contract terms, including Medicare fraud and abuse, antitrust, anti-kickback, anti-referral, and private security laws. He's an international speaker. I've shared the stage with him many times. I want to welcome to the program. Hey, Brad, how's it going?
Awesome, man. It's a long intro. Hopefully we have time left to have any comments for me. Gosh, we're going to work my bio and make it a lot shorter for you, man. I definitely think you have to catch your breath now, right?
We're good. Thank you for coming back on. And, the hot topics right now, obviously, is everyone's following the development of, as we emerge, if that's even a thing, from COVID. And one of the things I wanted to get right to is, I mean, your law firm, as I mentioned in the intro, you're at the epicenter of this thing. Everybody's anxious. And what are some of the most frequently asked questions you're fielding now as it relates to your relationship with the doctors?
Yeah, and again, Tim, thanks again for the invite back. I do appreciate it. But it's amazing because when this thing started, the questions have pivoted so much from the very beginning. It started with, can I keep my practice open? To now that my practice is closed, what am I supposed to do? To now, can I reopen? And so it keeps changing, and it changes, it feels like, by the week or two, depending on what's going on in that particular area. And I think the most consistent theme of questions that we are absolutely getting now is, now that people are reopened, it's how to get my staff back, because and then once they come back, how do I make sure that if the outbreak happens with one of them, what am I supposed to do? And a lot of times it actually starts where we are today, which is educating yourself. There is a lot of information out there as it relates to what you can and cannot do, but it's spread out in so many different areas. Even for myself, who I spent hours trying to keep up with it, but we got federal regulations that we have to look to. We have state regulations that we have to look to. And of course, depending on how large of an organization your medical office is, you have your own, bylaws and handbooks and things that you have to look to. So there's a lot to go to that you have to look at. And one of the reasons I do think, especially with staff, is when people went home, they got very nervous about coming back to work. And so whenever I have a client saying, you know, my nurse injector won't come back, the first question I ask is why, and it normally is because they're scared, they're terrified, and they said, but I need to get them back, and I said, well, what have you done to get them there? And a lot of times it's like, I told them to come back. I was like, okay, well, I get that, but have you told them what you've done to protect them? Because if you think, you know, going back to education, you need to educate your staff. A lot of my doctors have spent hours and hours and hours attending webinars and listening and hearing what's going on, and they have it in their head, but they haven't spent the time stopping and realizing, I got to get my staff where I am. And so I've had many clients spend 3-4 hours with their staff saying, these are all the protocols I've put in place to protect you guys. This is how we're going to be wearing PPE. This is how we're going to be socially distancing. This is how we're going to make sure when our patients arrive, our staff arrives, that they are, you know, that they don't have the symptoms. But if they do, we're going to be very smart about how we interact with each other. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do on the front end just to get them comfortable. And I think, Tim, the biggest thing that happens is, and they don't realize it to it later, is when someone's scared, what do? They act out. And what's happened is, especially with staff, you know, they're reporting their reporting their companies or medical practices to OSHA, and they're reporting in their medical companies to the newspaper, and they're reporting them to the medical boards. None of which is a good spot to be in, and all of which is coming from fear of the unknown. And that's why I say, you know, in the beginning, it's just with the staff is just educating them.
So that begs the question. So as a layperson, I'm not an attorney, as you know, it's got to be a tricky dance. What are the legal implications around that? I know it's probably, you know, difficult question depending on where you are in the state, but let's say I mandate everybody comes back and they go, no. Can I then say, well, you're out, and there's no liability, or what? Then I got to go hire new people, or how is that dynamic playing out, right?
So let's just assume for that question, there's a lot of federal laws that they'll apply, and I don't want to go into all the exceptions because it makes it more difficult. But the first one that we'll look at is the ADA, Americans with Disability Act, and that has to do with accommodating someone. And so that's why when I started the discussion is, which I can get into, is that if someone says they can't do something, you have to accommodate them. Well, the accommodation can only be met at certain levels. If the accommodation is fear, I'm afraid of working, that's not, you know, listed at this time as a disability. And so we still obviously want to work with that individual and say, you know, what can you do to get them comfortable? Can they telecommute? Meaning, if this is an individual who's a back office person, and yeah, you'd like to be at the office, but in reality, they're just submitting the pay, you know, sending out stuff. Do they really have to be in there? Well, you know, a client of mine in California, nurse injector, refused to come in. And he's like, hey, the only way I can pay you is if you come in. So he furloughed her, and obviously she was getting paid with at that point, but eventually he had to make a decision with that individual as if she didn't come in. And he spent time educating her and getting her up to date and talking about all the safety protocols they put in place that had to do with obviously their staff, as to what you do, your patients, and obviously the facility itself, the three main areas that you have to address. And she never felt comfortable, so he finally just had to terminate it, that relationship. And she had been with them for like 15 or 20 years. So wow. It was not something that he was happy about, but he was open, operational, and he needed a person in there. So these are not easy decisions that anyone has to make. These are not evil individuals that don't want to come to work because they're sitting around eating bonbons and drinking white wine and watching Netflix. They're just scared, and everyone's going to have their own risk tolerance as to how they feel about this, and just in general, obviously.
Yeah.
And what's been fascinating to us, honestly, is our clients that have their own ORs or their teams used to being in the operating room are having very little problems.
Yeah, they're used to being around,
because they're used to dealing with pathogens. They're used to dealing with the fact that you scrub well and wear masks and sometimes wear shields. And so to them, this is part of the practice of medicine. But to those who are used to being only on the aesthetic side, where you come in and as you've been in these places before, they're beautiful places. They don't feel like a medical facility most of the time. A lot of people dress to the nine in these places. And also overnight, they have to wear a mask. They have to wear a face shield depending on the service they're renting. They're wearing scrubs sometimes over their clothes depending on how they're interacting with the patients. And so it's changed the way they're seeing it, and it makes them more nervous, and that ticks them up a lot. And so again, we're definitely seeing that, what you just described. And so then now the next question is like, do I have to continue to pay that person? And how long do I have to continue to pay that person? And that has to do, again, with number one is this federal law. So the FMLA, do you qualify under that, and can they be paid under that? There's something that passed recently, and I say recently.
FMLA is Family Leave Act, right?
Family Medical Leave Act, sorry, thank you, yeah. And then they passed another law that came out that chased it, and for this purposes, we're going to call it the FMLA Plus, because what they did is they enhanced it during COVID time. But all my medical practices, they're exempt. So the 90, as you know, more than 75% of our clients are in the medical community. So if you are a medical provider, which is a huge definition, by the way, the Labor Department came out, and then really it's basically if you're in any side of med spa or cosmetic or any type of medical services, you're exempt from this law. And that law actually enhanced the payment. So all our clients on the medical side were exempt. And then if you have under 50 employees, you can basically self-exempt, which is, and I use air quotes there for those in the podcast, but there is a process you internally go through that you can self-exempt if you have less than 50 employees. So again, the vast majority of my clients, some of them are above that, but they're all of them medical. So again, they were exempt either way. And so then you go look at your policies, and so what kind of PTO do they have, what kind of sick leave, and then you have to pay them out of that piece. So there is a process they go through that they have to kind of step by step go through those processes. But it's because you're dealing with someone, rightfully so, everyone, again, is going to look at this differently, that might be scared.
And I think, you know what I always love about you as a quick side note, and really your practice, you, Michael, and the guys, is you can tell a good lawyer when they start out with, the first thing we all need to do is calm down and understand the other side. These aren't crazy people who want to be angry or they want to take advantage. They're just anxious. And I think that's a really good perspective, so that you're not, kind of fueling the fire on the employer side. And it's tough. It's a delicate balance. And, I encourage anybody listening to the program to give these guys a call. They know what they're talking about. And then the next thing I wanted to pivot to, and one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on today was, what are so we're coming out of COVID or going back in, depending on where you're at in the world. What are the top non-compliance, those 2 or 3 mistakes you're seeing over and over again? And it could be even related to, employees, but what are the mistakes you're seeing, and how, the most important thing is, how can folks avoid that and the costly disruption that it creates?
I think the first big issue I'm seeing is lack of knowledge of how and when to use PPE, personal protective equipment. Yeah. And the reason why I say that is whether again, unfortunately, it's become political. You're on the mask to not mask concept. The CDC recommendation is, if you are rendering medical services and you as a medical individual are wearing a mask, and you're with a patient for more than 15 minutes, which a lot of times some of our providers are, and that patient ends up being tested positive for COVID, and that patient, and you're wearing a mask, and the patient's not, then you don't have to self-quarantine, you should self-monitor. So it's a huge shift. As far as in the beginning, that was not the case. They've now shifted and saying, hey, if you're wearing a mask, and then if you're treating the individual, that same individual turns out to be positive, and they end up removing their mask, or they don't have a mask on, and you're treating around their mouth, you're supposed to have a goggles or a face shield on. So again, this goes back to, we're fine. Again, I've had debates with a lot of physicians about whether or not wearing a mask or not wearing a mask is going to be sufficient. I'm just trying to tell people, if you're trying not to have to keep sending people home every time a positive patient comes to your office and you have to send the entire office home, if you're wearing PPE, CDC allows you to self-monitor and not have to shut your medical practice down. Okay. And I have had that phone call, I feel like weekly, if not. My partner Renee and I swear, we at 1 week we had 5 or 6 different clients across the country call us, all with either a positive patient that came through or a positive employee. And by them following these guidelines, we were able to walk them off the ledge of having to close their practice and sending everyone home to self-quarantine. And
Wow.
so those are all some, and again, there's a lot of other pieces. That's probably the first one, is making sure you go to the process of
Do you sense, is it your sentiment that there's pushback against wearing PPE because of the look around it, or?
So I did have early in this, when it first started, I actually had some people tell me.
Okay, go. We almost lost you. Go ahead.
I said early on when this all first started, I absolutely had people saying, I'm not going to ever give someone an injection while wearing a mask. I think that would look really weird. So they definitely were pushing back on that. But now that the CDC has been pushing so hard on how to protect yourself, some of these same states are adopting those as rules. And this goes in a category where when I'm talking to my doctors about this, or any provider actually, there's some squishy area that when it comes to medical boards and dental boards and your nursing boards, where they will go after you if you basically put yourself, if you put the patient at an unnecessary risk or harm, you fail to meet the standards of care, or you act in a manner that they deem to be unprofessional and unethical behavior. Okay. So my fear always is, I want to protect your license. That's my, when I get asked questions, I say, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to put you in the best position, the most defensible position, that if there's ever a medical board complaint, again, what are these people that are scared, they're complaining, you can say, hey, I'm following the best standards. So do you want to go in front of your medical board or nursing board and say, yeah, I don't believe in masks, and even though the CDC recommends it, and even though my state, so some states are mandatory, some's a may versus must, right? I don't think I'm doing unnecessary risk to my patients, or I think I'm following the standard of care. Great, you're just going to have to prove that up and have a really good way of saying the CDC's wrong or my state's wrong with those recommendations. And they could be, by the way. I'm not saying they are, but again, what I'm trying to do is saying, if the CDC recommends that, a plaintiff's attorney who's going to say that your patient got COVID and it's your fault that they got COVID because you refused to wear a mask. Again, we're just trying to minimize their risk, and so that's definitely an area that we're very concerned with our providers who are fighting us on that, because we feel like they're at least increasing their overall potential liability.
Yeah, again, that's a tricky one. It's interesting because I was speaking with a friend of mine who is in Oklahoma, which at the time could be different today, but this was 3 weeks ago. That was pretty much wide open. And what they would, Christy Morrow, I don't know if you know, but great gal and super successful med spa. And what they were doing is, in addition to having people text when they got in the parking lot, hey, I'm here, and then they rush them through the waiting area. They kind of left it up to the patient to say, we're comfortable. If you want us to wear a mask, we'll wear a mask. If you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you don't want to wear a mask, we'll do whatever you want model. And that to your point probably only works in a state environment where it's wide. There are no regular, there's no requirements that they do that.
Yeah, it's the may versus must piece. And the other piece is, and going back to that patient care that you mentioned, the thing we definitely recommend to our clients is to minimize the time you spend with that individual personally, like in person, but maximize the standard of care. So that goes where telehealth comes in. That goes, meaning that you try to do as much as you can before they come in via telehealth, and then when they do come in, obviously if you're doing injection, you've already cleared them, you've walked through the issues. I have many clients that just do what they say. They wait in the car, they text them, they bring them straight to the exam room. They come in, they obviously double check the exam, they then render the service, and then they walk right out because they've actually paid online already. They filled out any updates to the paperwork electronically. Again, they're minimizing, but they're still following the standards of care, which is essential. And going back to your point, if you're with someone less than 15 minutes, and the vast majority of the time you are social distancing. So I have doctors will walk in the office, with the patient, they'll stay 6 feet apart the whole time they're talking, and then they'll come in very quickly, do the procedure they need to do, and they'll step back out. Now, again, if you're using something where something splatters, you absolutely want to wear a mask, and sometimes obviously a shield. It depends on the procedure that you're doing. A lot of times, obviously, no matter what, it requires you to wear a glove anyway. But again, these are the kind of things that, so long as you're still meeting that standard of care, and we're saying maximize it, and maximize it in the ways that you best can. by using the technology that's at our fingertips that make life easier, but then minimize the amount of time that you're with them personally. And again, in an operation setting and other things, that's impossible. Like some people are like, Brad, you don't understand, this procedure by itself takes 25 minutes. I'm like, okay, well, if that's the case, then let's think about if you should be wearing PPE, and if so, what type of PPE should you be wearing?
Interesting. I want to kind of move to this next subject, and I'm glad you brought it up because I was hoping to get to it. Have you seen, as far as telehealth goes, has there been much change in terms of deregulation around telehealth? Because, you know, for example, in Rhode Island, I live in Rhode Island, you couldn't, nobody was doing telehealth. Now all of a sudden, all the doctors are pinging me, hey, you want to do telehealth? So was there some big shift in that, and what's going on with that?
So telehealth is controlled like anything with the practice of medicine by a state. So every single state had different rules about how you could render medical services and what do those services look like. So in some states, they say the only way you can render services to a patient via telehealth or telemedicine is that you had a pre-existing relationship with that patient in person, meaning that you saw him one time beforehand, and then you could do it. Well, you know, other states have changed and said, well, you don't have to have a pre-existing relationship with that person, but when you render services to them, you have to meet the same standard of care as if you would, if they were there in person. That's the best way to kind of describe it. There's other consents and other things I won't bore your audience with that they would have to abide by. But the piece is, if you tell me, and I've had this conversation, well, Brad, the only way if I would do this procedure, I would have to touch their skin to make this determination. And like, well, then you can't use telemedicine, because you can work through all your questions and spend, again, minimizing the time with them in person. But if you have to physically touch someone to finally diagnose the individual, then you can't use telehealth. So then going to your question, what happened was, when they wanted people to still see doctors but not see them in person, the federal government urged all the states to lower the standards that they were requiring. And then, and some of your audience probably don't know this, but Medicare and Medicaid do pay for certain telemedicine. So the federal payers lowered the standards a little bit to make it easier. So then a lot of people are paying attention to that. And then the states, a lot of them that have issued emergency orders to lower their standards, and allowed so if I'm licensed in Texas and I wanted to treat a patient in Louisiana, generally speaking, I also have to be licensed there. But many states said, hey, we need help. If you're licensed, you're good right now. So again, they lowered who could render those services as to where you physically were located and where the patient was physically located. There has been a ton of stuff from the state level and the federal level saying, hey guys, can we stay here now? Even if let's pretend COVID goes away, is this okay? So there's some pushback from other medical boards saying, no, we like the old-fashioned way where you have to come in. And some medical boards are like, hey, this seems to be working. So that's why it's all of a sudden, when I say it picked up, I've been speaking on telemedicine for years, Tim. Yeah. And I have a few clients that just because I have some telemedicine clients in general. So I have a few clients that do it. When I say my phone blew up overnight was, what do I have to do, Brad? I know you talked about this. What do I need to place? And it's like, you need this, and this. Like, okay, I'm doing it. I have to keep in touch with my patients. But yes, overnight, almost every single client of mine that never had telemedicine, it was like, hey, can I use Zoom? Can I use this? Can I use that? I'm like, okay, yes, but you have to add this, or yes, you can do that, or no, you can't use Facebook Live. You know, so like you had to walk them through all those kind of questions.
Yeah, it's amazing. And if someone had told me, you know, back in June of last year, there might be a pandemic coming, sounds like there would have been a couple investments I would have made. No doubt. Those guys blew up overnight. It was like, what's Doxy? Now the Doxy guy's out on the boat. He's got the girls all. Woo! Tell him. Good for them. Good for them. So, listen, as we start to pivot again and wind down, one of the things that has changed a lot, and I'm curious to hear your take on this. So you guys, like us, are, you know, popular invited guests all over the world, and particularly in the U.S. And it's tough because a lot of folks in our community, they rely on those shows for things like this, right? To get those conversations. And so at Adatto, what are you guys doing now so that you can stay connected with not only your existing clients of the firm, but prospective clients of the firm who are looking for that education. How can folks engage with you? Webinars, podcasts, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, just like you, we've been speaking for years, and so overnight, as you can imagine, there were no longer any places to go, and so we had been shooting internal videos for, just like you, we have a membership program. So we have a portal where behind the paywall, we would have videos for our Access Plus members, and we would shoot those, 2 or 3 a month. Well, when COVID happened, what we did is we just flipped it and started a YouTube channel, which is funny because, we're late to the game, but we never really saw a reason to use it. And we were shooting 5 to 6 videos a week, just trying to keep people up to date as to what was happening. These videos would be anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the need of PPPs, or this is what's going on here, or this is what the OCD said, or this is what OSHA said, or whoever it was. We were just trying to get the information out there because we felt like this was not a time to worry about how we're going to get paid. This was a time to educate our clientele, but more importantly, everyone else, to make sure they understood it. And then, like you, we have been working on putting together a podcast for a solid 2 years. We're just late to the game, but we did launch the Legal 1-2-3s with Bert Adatto in June of this year. So we've shot season 1, and we're actually currently recorded season 1, and that's being released every other week, and we're recording season 2 right now. Because again, we were trying to find other ways in which we could educate everyone as the important aspects that are out there. And then finally, internally, again, for our Access Plus members, we do a monthly web or Zoom webinar with some big factual issues that our clients are asking us, so that we can do it internally for them, so they can pepper us with other questions, so we can keep them up to date with what's happening. So it's been an interesting new way of communicating. But again, going back to, I think, how we started this, is it's very important to keep yourself educated as an attorney. I had to keep myself educated, but also, especially if you're a frontline medical provider, to understand the do's and don'ts, the things you can, you shouldn't, or you must do.
Yeah, and I tip my hat to you guys. There's not a lot of lawyers thinking like you, and we're all trying to find ways to contribute. That's the biggest thing, and through education. And I've always said to you, the best marketing in the world that you can do is create a positive impact on the industry you're in through education and commitment to that. And I know that you and Michael and the firm have been 100% committed to keeping the communication going. Like you said, it wasn't just running the meter. It was making sure that people got timely information. And I know the community at large is grateful for that. And anybody who's listening, by the way, little shout out to our listeners. Today, we surpassed more than 13,000 unique people have downloaded the podcast in a little over a year. Shout out to you guys. It's awesome. More than 1,200 new subscribers in the calendar month of July, and we're only a little bit over a year old. And so today's awesome. Is great. I was excited about that. So the message is getting out, right? That education makes a big difference. We don't charge for the podcast, and we encourage people to, share it with their friends. So you guys have been great. If somebody wanted you to shoot you an email and ask a question, what would be the best way to get a hold of you, Brad?
Info at Bert Adatto is the easiest way to get a hold of us. That way my team can get it faster than if you email me directly. I'm not as fast as my team is, but that's info at byrdadadatto.com, and that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of us. And I think one thing I just want to repeat what you said, which is I agree, is that when you educate the society, you educate the audience, it's because we want everyone to do well and not get in trouble. That's the whole purpose of education, so they can understand it, because it doesn't help the industry when everyone's getting in trouble, because that just takes us down.
Yeah. Well, you guys have been exemplary folks in the community, and I know everyone looks to you. Brad is a good friend of ours, and we've worked together on a lot of projects. I encourage anyone listening, if you need some advice, whether it's just most important thing, guys, how to stay out of trouble. But this employee thing, it's a big issue, and what you can and can't do, and compliance is a moving target. And Bert Adatto's got some cool ways that you can work with them for not a ton of money. And I will shamelessly plug these guys because I believe in them, and I've sent a lot of folks their way. So with that said, Brad, I really appreciate you taking the time once again to join us today. And hopefully we'll make this a every 6-month occurrence. The folks, the listeners love the free advice, and we're grateful to you. So thank you very much, bud.
Thanks again, Tim. I appreciate it.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of True to Form, brought to you by Candela, a leading U.S.-based global medical aesthetic device company, engineering technology that enables practices to provide advanced solutions for a broad range of medical aesthetic applications. To learn more about this week's podcast sponsor, visit candelamedical.com. And to learn more about your podcast provider, Crystal Clear, visit crystalcleardm.com. Be sure to subscribe to the show on all your favorite music apps, including iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and tune in to stay up to date with the newest episodes. Thank you for listening.